Welcome back to theCUBE, coming from your studio here at the New York Stock Exchange. This is a special episode of theCUBE because today I am joined by our co-founder and CEO, Dave Vellante, Chief Straight Talking Officer at theCUBE Research, who is going to talk us through some of the 2026 predictions he has just published in conjunction with ETR around what's happening in the world of tech and enterprise in the year ahead. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, Gemma, good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
So this is a fascinating report, but also I think it's a fascinating time in the world of tech and spend. There is a lot of noise, maybe not as much signal as we'd like. Talk me through some of the top predictions that you see. Where are you placing your bets?
Well, in previous years, Gemma, I have said this is not going to be the year of AI ROI. I said that in 24. I said that again in 25. I think 2026 is the year of AI ROI. So, one of my predictions that I did with Eric Bradley of ETR is that 2026 is the year that enterprises actually do start reporting AI ROI at scale. And so, the ETR data and the Cube data that we have it's pointing us in a new direction with signs of productivity increasing. And there's more evidence of that enterprises are beginning to operationalize AI in ways that are going to give them sustainable returns. And I'll give you an example. The percent from the ETR data, the percent of customers reporting that they don't measure AI ROI has now dropped 10 percentage points in the past year. So it's down to, under 20% don't measure AI ROI. So much, much higher percentage now than there was in the early days. And even though the returns are still tepid, sort of in the single digits, for most customers, we think that's going to kick into high gear, and that's what's going to have implications on employment, which we might talk about. And the other thing is the CapEx to build AI factories is continues. We just saw that from Meta and Microsoft in their earnings prints this week. The CapEx is going to be north of $500 billion, as you know. So enterprises, they're going to have better access to that T per token generation, this year, and the cost per token is going to continue to come down as NVIDIA ramps Vera Rubin. So all the stars are lining up, in my view.
So let's talk a little bit about AI factories. It's a term that's kind of defining what the future infrastructure layer could look like, right? But fundamentally, it means that we're moving away from licenses, and now it's all talk of tokens. What are your thoughts in terms of you mentioned NVIDIA and Vera Rubin. What are your thoughts on the incumbent versus the, entrant players in the space? Like, do you think this is just going to be another gangbuster year for NVIDIA? Do you see anyone making some ground on them?
Well, I definitely think one of the predictions that we had is that NVIDIA is going to separate even further from the pack because of Vera Rubin. You remember at CES, Jensen announced Vera Rubin is in being manufactured at some scale. It was a 5x performance improvement, a 10x throughput improvement, a 1/10 the cost per token. And we think that's going to generate a 15x increase in demand with Jevons paradox. The cheaper it is, the more people buy. And so that ties in to a couple of things. One is, I think that most GPU competitors are going to flee to the edge, frankly. With certainly inference, but also to the edge. I think the one exception is probably Cerebras for the super low latency workloads. I think Cerebras probably has that's going to tip of the pyramid opportunity, but I think even Grok, Elon was going to develop a data center GPU. He has said no, and I think they will be at the edge where Tesla has some expertise. I think you'll find that TPUs from Google and ASICs from others are going to be more used for inference use cases, sort of at the edge. I think NVIDIA is going to be at the edge. And the other piece is, I think to your point about gravity, I do think data gravity plays in here, and I think it's going to benefit platform incumbents. Good data means better AI. And so we think data gravity benefits database platform incumbents because enterprises are going to build AI capabilities on top of their existing ecosystem. So Snowflake is an example. The data suggests that add-on services to a core data platform like vector search or coding assistance are going to become a natural extension of that underlying database. And that prediction is the core platform becomes even more sticky, and that stickiness is going to confer advantage to other companies because customers are going to pull adjacent workloads. So for instance, Databricks, Oracle, Microsoft, Google, AWS, the hyperscalers that have database chops are going to do well, we think. And so the data rich get richer, I guess, is the prediction there.
And there's some really big names there, right? Big incumbent players, and all of the data, I guess, is essentially potentially going to, like, again, continue to flow towards these large incumbent platforms. The Databricks model is quite interesting because it's usage based, right? Where do you think there's some like competitive opportunity for others in the space?
Well, I do think that, with the massive venture infusion, private equity, hiding, lurking in the shadows right now are thousands of startups working on, solving new problems. And they're doing so with the sort of, I know it's a buzzword, but an AI native mindset. And what that means is they don't have legacy processes. A lot of the processes that are being automated today with AI, I call it paving the cow path. Well, that cow path may not be the best path to the outcome. And so I think these startup companies are doing 10x more with the same resources, or they're doing the same with 1/10 the resources. And so I think we're going to see some names come out of the woodworks. I think there's some signs of that already. Nobody heard of OpenAI a few years ago, or Anthropic, or XAI and Grok. So, but those are sort of very large organizations now, and I think there are going to be a lot of specialized startups as well that are going to compete and disrupt. I don't think at all the Mag 7 is the end of super companies. I think we're going to see more emerge. I think we're going to see new great software companies emerge. I think the LLMs, the foundation model companies, the frontier model companies are going to really push the SaaS model. The licensing model, the seat-based licensing model is, I think, outdated. So there's just going to be disruption everywhere.
And 2025, we heard a lot about this circular economy of AI, right? The dependency levels that are somewhat unprecedented. Just this week, you mentioned Microsoft's earnings. I think, their earnings are down pretty significantly. And a lot of it was to do with some of the comments Amy Hood made about OpenAI, right? And the dependencies that exist. What are your thoughts on 2026 in that circular space? Are we going to just see more of the same, do you think?
I think the leaders in this business, when you go back to the PC era, Gemma, the many leaders were dismissive of the PC as a toy, and we saw what happened with Intel and Microsoft. You look at the cloud era, there were a lot of people dismissive of the cloud. I actually think today's leaders have learned a lot from that and see these circular investments, if you will, or what you've called them, as ways to build ecosystems and protect their base. And I think that's what a lot of this is, in part. So the hyperscalers are all doing that. And I think NVIDIA is leading this with, they basically, to me, are the new Intel. Remember, Intel and Microsoft was the sort of dominant standard. NVIDIA has both the hardware and the software, of course, the entire system, and they're building out an ecosystem, and then they're extending that to physical AI with robotics. So because they have such a lead, they have such a strong economics, they're able to sprinkle the money around, and I think they're going to get a lot of hits. That not all of them will hit, but I think that's, to answer your question, I think it's required to build out AI, and I don't think it's all going to end pretty, but I think ultimately there will be big winners and trillion-dollar markets that emerge.
And in the frontier model space, again, some interesting news today around China's moonshot, right, in their Kimi 2.5 model, which is this like swarm of agent model, that creates a whole load of triangulation of workflows, etc., right? It seems to me as though models are popping up like at the pace of sound. What are your thoughts on some of the big players there, like OpenAI, Google, Perplexity? I'm a big fan of that product personally. Like, where do you think things are going to go in terms of the constant competitive advantage?
I'm kind of a contrarian in this one. There's a lot of negative sentiment around OpenAI right now. And I point to the naysayers that, well, some some people think there's a good bet there because they're raising $100 billion on an $800 billion valuation. So now maybe that's just dumb money going in. I don't think so. I think what Anthropic has done in the enterprise, I think OpenAI is very clearly eyeing the enterprise. I'm hoping that they've put AGI a little bit on the back burner, even though they still talk about it. And one of my predictions is that OpenAI will exit 2026 with more enterprise revenue than Anthropic, and I think Anthropic will do very well. Also, as I said, I think Grok will do well at the edge. I don't think they're going to try to take on the enterprise, and I think Gemini as well will do quite well. But here's the thing about Google: a search query costs fractions of a penny. An AI query costs 100x that, and so I think part of the reason why OpenAI did a little head fake on ads. Remember, Sam Altman in his Code Red said we're going to pull back on advertising, and recently they announced some advertising products. I think part of that could be they don't want to give Google and Google's advertising business, which is the vast majority of their gross profit, they don't want to give them free rein and to slow roll that transition. Google would like nothing more than to have the time to do that. So I think a lot of that is trying to go after Google. Now we've seen Microsoft try to do that when they AIified Bing, and that completely failed. But I do think that OpenAI has a better opportunity. A lot of the other contrarian thing here is that people say, well, they're consumer, and the real opportunity is enterprise. I agree with that, by the way. The opportunity is enterprise, but I think their consumer volume is going to be a benefit in the enterprise because of the data and the volume economics. And to the last point is, to your point on China and models out of China, that to me is the wild card. These open models out of China are super innovative. They're moving fast. They're able to glean, no pun intended, off of the US frontier models and get to market very quickly in an open model, dynamic that is very hard to predict what's going to happen there. I would say my prediction would be they're absolutely going to get traction, and they're going to get a really big fair share of the AI market.
So bringing it back to something that's very dear to all of our hearts, right? The human element and the human impacts of this. Like, there's no denying that since November 2022, generative AI has fundamentally shifted the commercial landscape around labor and talent. This report talks to some of those findings and some of those, I guess, intentions in the year ahead. Like, what really stood out to you? Are you optimistic? Are you as concerned?
It's funny. I think it was September. I was at the UiPath event with Rebecca Knight. And Rebecca brought this up. She said, well, there's a crisis right now in white collar employment. I said, it's not really a crisis. We had a debate about it on camera. You can check that out. We had Eric Brynjolfsson on, who's a Stanford economist, used to be MIT, and we talked to him about it. And I felt like at the time, there was slight evidence, but not really dramatic in terms of, historical trends. I think you're right. I think there's no question now. And so the prediction that we put forth was AI eats into white collar employment and really shows up decisively in the numbers. So 2026, I think, is going to be that crossover year when AI's impact on white collar employment becomes really visible in a way that's measurable and broadly accepted and acknowledged, even by people who were naysayers like myself back in September. And we've obviously seen the early impact in junior and entry level roles. And this shows up in the ETR data. And it shows up first as headcount avoidance. The figures on headcount avoidance have ticked up in the last year. And then I think scaling without labor is going to be a big theme in 2026. We just dropped this prediction last week. You're seeing Amazon lay off another 16,000 employees. Zuckerberg last night on his earnings call said they can do much more with less. His engineers, he said the hardcore people that are using LLMs really seriously are like 80% more productive. So they're doing much, much more with less. IBM's earnings are reflecting internal use of AI. Now, the flip side of this, we expect sustained growth. The other part of this prediction is sustained growth and a boom in blue collar roles tied to the AI factory build out. So here, Gemma, we're talking about specialized trades, technical operators, like artisan plumbers, I call them, like specialized plumbers, HVAC engineers, data center builders, cooling experts. Demand is like already high, and it's rising, and its CapEx is only going to fuel that more.
In terms of the tech spend broadly, right? Tech has always been a mixture of software, hardware, and services. We've seen another, I want to call it a downturn because it's in a downturn, but in cases where we've seen labor, squeezes in the market, managed service spend and IT service spend has actually increased, right? Because you plug that gap sometimes with an outside vendor P&L. What are your thoughts on 2026 in terms of the technology landscape for service providers?
So a couple of things. So we've been tracking this with our friends at ETR for quite some time, the better part of a decade. And our call is for IT spending increases at 5% this year. ETR has that a little bit lower, but I'm bumping it up. But since COVID, organizations have seen a sustained pressure on IT budgets. We came out of COVID with a 7% expectation, and then it dropped down below 3% as the 2-year interest rates grew. And so that in uncertainty range, you had geopolitical tensions, you had wars, you had tariffs, and those shocks have kept IT decision makers cautious. Now, this is different from what vendor revenue. Vendor revenue is exploding because of the CapEx. But if you just look at, the data and the quarterly macro drill down that ETR does, you're seeing enterprises are much more conservative. Large enterprises, even more conservative. 5% goes down to 4% for the large enterprises. C-suites may be a little bit more optimistic. So why is this important to the question that you asked? IT budgets probably account for about, at the macro, 4% of company or corporate revenues. We think that's going to shift dramatically over the next 5 to 7 years and increase to about 10%. And it's going to shift from sort of legacy activities, spinning up, servers and, networks and, plugging things like that and internal services. And it's going to shift toward tapping APIs to get token services that are going to abstract a lot of complexity. And to answer your question, to get there, we do see a boom in professional services companies. Everybody's saying, oh, these guys are screwed because they're so labor intensive. We see it as opposite. They have the expertise and the talent to actually drive that transformation. And we think they're going to do very well. If anything, they could eat into some of the SaaS spending. But overall, we see tech spending increasing dramatically over the next 5 to 7 years.
So Dave, before you go, in terms of the Cube research broadly, right, it's a big engine room. You've got an incredible team of analysts and researchers that work with you on a number of projects throughout the year. 2026, even for the next 3 to 5 months, what are you guys focused on? What sort of asks are you getting from customers and long-term clients? What are they looking to understand more?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to address that, Gemma. I mean, our superpower is we combine the authority of analysts and domain expertise with the power of the Cube and the audience and the brand awareness. And so one of the big things that we're doing in 2026 is we're launching summits that are audience-first initiatives. So we've got summits around trust in AI, how to get the most out of AI and data. We're right now we're experimenting or testing how AI is affecting unified communications and collaboration. So the summits are a combination of our live activity that we do in studios in Palo Alto, here in Marlborough, outside of Boston, and at the New York Stock Exchange. And we're bringing in practitioners like Walmart, like Capital One, like Texas Mutual, like Eli Lilly, like Dun & Bradstreet. And we're taking a sort of practitioner view back. So we're starting with that audience, and then we're serving that audience. And of course, we'll always have services to connect brands to that audience. But our ethos, Gemma, has always been free content, serve the audience with great content, and good things happen. And now we're bringing in the domain expertise, building out our analyst team. And it's just a lot of fun to be a part of.
Well, I'm very excited for what's to come, especially, Dave, for the time you spent here in New York over the next couple of months. Thanks so much for coming on theCUBE.
Hey, thanks for having me, Gemma. It's great to see you.
I'm Gemma Allen, coming to you from our studio here at the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks so much for watching.